Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's fourth space. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Transforming Pain into Hope, Dialogue and Solidarity Across Communities. And this is the inaugural event of the Courageous Conversations Speaker Series. And just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube, live from fourth space. We are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. In fourth space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine research questions, projects, conversations in development across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting also. So those of you joining us by Zoom, if you have any questions, comments, that's wonderful. Please put those into the chat. We'll do our best to read those out later on. And for those of you here in the space, if you have any comments or questions also, just raise your hand later on and we'll bring a microphone over to you so that everyone can hear. Okay, with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce the President and the Vice Chancellor here at Concordia University, Dr. Graham Carr. Graham, great to have you.
Thanks very much, Douglas, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the university. Welcome if you're here in person, welcome if you're here online. As Doug said, we are on unceded Indigenous lands at Concordia University, where the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and the waters on which we live and on which we work. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for First Peoples and for many diverse communities. And I think that's particularly relevant in the context of the conversation we're having this afternoon about how we navigate challenge times and find inspiration through dialogue. And I want to take a moment right off the outset to thank, first of all, Marc Lafrance, but also the Office of the Provost and the Equity Office here at the university, as well as Fourth Space, for making this event possible. Marc's been working long and hard as a special advisor to the Provost to try to get us to this point, and I'm really thrilled this afternoon to welcome two guests to the university, Patrice Brodeur, and I know Marc's going to say more later. Alors, bienvenue et merci, Patrice, d'être ici, et aussi Amal. So glad to have you join us, and of course my colleague David Morris from the Department of Philosophy. I am really happy is kind of the wrong word, but I think it's important, finally, that we're here today to begin this series of courageous conversations, and I think that's a very apt word. As you all know, as everyone knows, many universities, certainly including our own, have been struggling, to put it mildly, with the repercussions of war and violence in the Middle East over the last 18 months, which is continuing. And I think we need to remember, though, that it's not campuses in the abstract or universities as institutions, but the people on those campuses, students, faculty, staff, administrators. Those are the individuals, those are the groups who are struggling to make sense of the current context. And for many of those people, for many of you, perhaps in this room, the pain and the anguish is deeply, deeply personal, is visceral, and is a source of confusion, anger, disbelief. I'm sure there are many other words that could be applied. And I have to say that I think there's hardly enough empathy in the community to meet the need that's required right now, the magnitude of what we know people are experiencing. But sadly, we've all equally witnessed statements or actions that don't conform with the kind of behavior we expect to see on university campuses or in society more generally, and certainly not the kind of behavior or positioning that we would like to associate with the best of university life. And I think we have to acknowledge that reality too. And like other universities, Concordia has been accused of being anti-Semitic, of being Islamophobic, of not doing enough to protect members of its community, of being too oppressive in how it tries to address activities on campus. We are in a position, and we're not unique, where differences of opinion, including extremely divergent and opposed views, are being expressed as they should be expressed in a university. This is supposed to be a place where people can express their views and express differently held views. And I have to also add that, I've been at Concordia for an awfully long time, and one of the things that I'm proudest about is how increasingly diverse our community has become over the years and over the decades. And I'm persuaded, and I remain persuaded, that that diversity is part of what makes Concordia an exciting young university and part of what makes us an innovative university. But for diversity to be experienced in the best possible way, we also need to nurture and incubate cross-cultural understanding, tolerance, curiosity about the other, and as I said earlier, empathy. And I think, sadly, over the past 18 months, what we've witnessed at our university and elsewhere is that diversity has bled more and more into polarization, has bled more and more into positions that are really diametrically and inflexibly opposed to each other, and that has bred a kind of intolerance for other views and other people that really doesn't have any place in a community of knowledge and a community of inquiry and a community of curiosity. And I think, unfortunately, it's led to the silencing of some voices on campus, a retreat from wanting to engage with situations, perhaps because of fear of personal repercussions, which is real. And that has prevented us, I think, from undertaking meaningful dialogue, which should have been happening long ago. And that's why I am pleased, I guess I won't go back to that word, to be part of today's event. I'm grateful to the panelists for being part of it. And I also just want to applaud everybody who decided, frankly, everybody who had the courage to come here this afternoon and to set aside part of this afternoon, either to be here in person or online, to engage in this difficult conversation, which is long overdue. Now, I'm not naive enough to believe that this conversation means that some sort of reconciliation is a few short steps away. And I think we also need to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge that events elsewhere beyond our control have an influence and have an impact on how we can move forward. But I am really gratified to see so many people here today who want to engage in that conversation, who have the desire and the courage to want to do better, to want to listen better, and hopefully to accomplish good things together. So thank you very much for being here. And now over to you, Mark.
Thank you so much, Graham, for being here. Your wholehearted support of this event means a lot to me and to our community. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to see you today for this inaugural event of the Courageous Conversation Speaker Series. I'm so delighted by the level of interest in this event. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but we have been so pleased. We've got, I'm not sure exactly, 35 to 40 people in the room and almost 40 people online. This is a great turnout, especially at this time of year, exam time, and we're all exhausted, right? So thank you for being here. I don't think you'll regret it. As Graham mentioned, today's event is co-sponsored by the Provost's Office and the Equity Office. A big thank you to both of those offices for their steadfast support. And thank you also to the amazing people at Fourth Space. I want to do every event here, please. What they do is truly remarkable, and I'm enormously grateful for everything they've done to support this event. So I'd like to now make a few remarks of my own, if I may. They're intended to frame today's event in terms both general and specific. In doing so, I want to emphasize the fact that today's event is above all a dialogue about dialogue. It's meant to be inclusive and expansive and allow for a variety of different approaches and orientations and reflections. It is also meant to be a space in which we allow ourselves to wade into the unexpected, the uncertain, the unknown, and to imagine new ways of thinking and speaking and feeling. That said, today's event is not intended to be a space in which we try to convince the other of our own views. It's not a debate. It is instead about thinking, alone and together, about the complexities of talking to others, particularly when talking to others has become so hard for so many. As special advisor to the Provo on-campus life, I have a sense of how difficult dialogue has become, both on our campus and in society at large. Since October 2024, I have had meetings with over 200 community members, including students, faculty, and staff. During these meetings, I've had the honor and the privilege, and often the heartache, of hearing from community members on just about every side of the kaleidoscopic issues currently confronting us. They've given me a clear-eyed, if at times painful view of campus life today, and that view has taught me at least two things. The first is that our campus includes some of the most dynamic, engaging, and engaged, energizing, and inspirational people I've ever met. And the second is that, well, a lot of those people are in pain. For many of our community members, events unfolding around the world, like those in Israel and Palestine, are anything but abstract. They are devastatingly and sometimes terrifyingly concrete. So how do we take the pain that so many are feeling in our community and transform it into hope? I've borrowed this notion of transforming pain into hope from one of our guest speakers, Amal Elsana Alh'jooj, not only to express, but also to embody and embolden what we're trying to do here today. Essentially, our task is to explore the many dimensions of dialogue, the conversations we have with others, but also with ourselves, how they shape and are shaped by emotion and experience, and ultimately, how they can lead to increased understanding. After all, understanding is the absolute precondition of empathy, and empathy is the precondition of cooperation and trust. Before I give the floor to our distinguished first speaker, I want to take a moment to reflect on what it means to make today's event a generative one. We are in a shared space, surrounded by a diversity of people with a diversity of viewpoints. It behooves us, I think, to be as generous as we can with one another in this space. Because by stepping into this space, we've made a collective commitment to constructive reflection and exchange. Having made this commitment, we must also be mindful of what is at stake for so many of us in this room, online, and elsewhere, especially those who are suffering. To share meaningfully with one another through dialogue, we must be responsive to such suffering. It must be brought from the margins of our conversations into their very center. We will not solve all the problems of the world today. These problems will continue to consume us on an ongoing basis, making us anxious and depressed during the day and keeping us up at night. For some of us, these problems will continue to be the source of searing pain and a suffering so deep that it feels like it will never end. Today's session won't change that. We will continue to wrestle with our own thoughts and feelings, as well as those of others, about the catastrophic fates befalling so many around the world. But if we get things right today, then maybe, just maybe, we will learn to wrestle better. That ultimately is our goal today, to learn to wrestle better. So with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Patrice Brodeur. Patrice is an associate professor at the Institute of Religious Studies at the Faculty of Arts and Science at the University of Montreal. He holds a PhD from Harvard University and also studied for 2 years at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and 1 year at the University of Jordan. From 2005 to 2015, he held the Canada Research Chair in Islam, Pluralism, and Globalization, where he led an interdisciplinary research team on contemporary Islamic thought and different forms of dialogue. From 2013 to 2015, he founded the research department of the new intergovernmental organization, the International Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue in Vienna, Austria, which now contains more than 600 organizations using interfaith dialogue for conflict transformation. Patrice, the floor is yours.
Nyawa, thank you, merci. First to our ancestors, of all of us in different ways, far and somehow connecting all of us on this planet, probably, for the fact that we are here today and that we have chosen to be here today in person and online. I want to thank also the organizers, Concordia University, the leadership of President Carr, for the possibility of being invited. It's a real honor for me to be here today. And I hope that my presentation, which will be a bit academic in some ways, we are in a university after all, will actually be available for all of you afterwards, because might be zooming through a few slides simply because of time, but I wanted to include them in part to show you the complexity. And I think if there's a place where I feel comfortable talking about complexity, it's a university space. So let's go. Okay. The title of our talk really is about pain and hope. And so I first start with the notion of what kinds of pain and hopes are we talking about. There are, of course, the physical pains and hopes. And then there are, of course, what I call sort of the emotional dimension. That's also obvious, as well as the intellectual. That may be a bit less obvious, and let me say a few words here. But intellectual pain is when we're trying to figure out something and we just can't get to it. And that happens a lot, at least for some of us at university, or I hope so, because we're struggling with addressing real issues and real challenges, and we struggle hard with our development of critical thinking to address them. One of my pain, intellectual pain, is why is there so much wealth and knowledge, and yet so much money goes into the armament business, and all kinds of sort of, realizations that are taking place from that, rather than investing in peaceful education, to allow us to learn to better understand sort of and manage our own differences. And so that's an intellectual pain to me when I realize that reality worldwide. And then there's spiritual sort of pain, because sometimes it's about sort of why is the connection between me and other people, but also me and the environment sort of not happening in a way that allows me to be more conscious of the fact that I take too often flights to travel to conferences. And even though I do it always, never for fun, by the way, never for fun. I tell you that. I made a point about when I was in my early 20s. I would never travel by plane for fun. Always under invitation for academic purposes and so on and so forth. But I've been contributing to pollution a huge amount. And so where's the disconnect here? So that's what I call a spiritual pain for myself. So part of the challenge when we talk about pain is when it becomes competing pains. When we actually compare our pains or try to compare pains on the basis of empirical evidence, of quantity. And it's almost a disaster every time we do that. Because how on earth can you compare the pain that a parent has in front of a crying baby, not understanding why the baby is crying, right? These are just two different kinds of pain at a very basic human level. The rest you know all, because we've all experienced different degrees of this pain, and we've heard also too often attempts to bring the head to understand the pain through explanations, arguments, historical sort of efforts to understand where it all comes from and so on and so forth, which are important to do. But if we don't first connect to the pain of each other, however that is expressed in the limitation that we often have in expressing our pains, then we're missing the boat of that spiritual interconnections between each other, and we're replacing it by this intellectual competition that is so much a reflection of the fact that our world in general, with neoliberalism and so on and so forth, has put in place so much the culture of competition. And that's a real problem to me. And so often we're not enough to thinking about this new concept of co-opetition, right? Sort of this notion of competing cooperation. Now, those are the ones who want the cake and eat it too. They want to continue competing when appropriate, and they want to also cooperate. They're good people, they want the best, and they want to somehow keep both. And so co-opetition is this new concept to do so. Now, I'm fine with that intellectually, but how that actually work in reality is a different story. But I think that here it brings us to the notion of debate versus dialogue, which was mentioned in the introduction very briefly. Because so much of our intellectual, educational setups are really, really focused much more on debate than anything else. Raise your hands, those of you who had debate clubs in your high schools, right? Which is a majority of you. How many of you have dialogue clubs in your high school? Nobody raises their hand, and I don't know about online, but anyway. I ask this question often. It's always the same thing. And it doesn't matter where I'm lecturing, on which, and it's really quite stunning, because we've put so much emphasis on critical thinking and very little on the critical management of our emotions and how we relate to each other. How do we develop the skills that are necessary to do dialogue rather than debate when appropriate? There are times when debate is necessary, but more often than not, I think dialogue is more productive and can go further. Now, of course, this is the kind of stuff that we can compare. If you were in my classroom, we'd take time to read this and compare the two different definitions on both sides. But for today, I'm just going to move on and talk about this, because here you have, there's me on the right, and then there's you, personally or collectively, on the left. And if we're in a debate, it's kind of like in opposition often of each other. And part of the difference in moving from debate to discussion to dialogue is to try to develop that sense of what about the we in this room, the we including those who are online. What is that we? And therefore move from often subtle competitive or even direct competition over who's going to win the argument about XYZ, to eventually sort of, not so much convincing, because we said earlier that we're not here to convince, but we're here to share in order to, in fact, get to more understanding. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, how on earth can I expand my empathy if I don't know the stories of people around me and beyond? And so that's necessary for the learning, the deeper learning to take place, including the learning that others have about understanding us. So there's a nice kind of mutual advantage at doing it that way, and eventually serving the we. And so that's part of the process here of deciding when do we want to debate and when do we want to prefer to do dialogue. Then I would say that part of the reason is because of this situation. This was presented to Davos in January of 2024. The global risks. Now, it's so small and there are so many that you can possibly not read them properly from where you sit. But there are 5 categories at the bottom in the legend. And so I'm going to get to those 5 categories in a moment. But that's kind of the complexity and the interconnectedness of all these different risk factors that the top economists and political leaders of the world, when meeting in Davos, sort of talked about. A year later, the same organization comes up with the 5 top risks for 2025. You can read them. I don't need to read them for you. And when you look at those, possibly each one of you can think of the way in which you personally are connected to one of those risks, directly or indirectly. It doesn't matter where on the planet we are interconnected under any one of those risk factors. The question is, how do we address them? How do we talk about them in a we way, in a human we way, in order to avoid falling into the bottom triangle, the infamous drama triangle, where my pain is seeking to be understood by finding a culprit and accusing the culprit of my pain in order to feel somehow better about it, which then causes the other to feel accused, rightly or wrongly, and therefore themselves being victim of your accusing them of something which they may or may not connect to. And then in this process, sometimes the victim or sometimes the victim and the persecutor are seeking an outside person to solve the problem. And that person ends up complicating things, or the group or the UN ends up complicating things instead of making it simpler. The mediation approach, right? Sometimes it's necessary, but the longer it lasts, the more complicated it becomes, and only adds to the complexity of our problem. The drama triangle happens at the small scale of our family dynamics. I know it did for me. I don't know if you were lucky enough that you didn't have that in your family, but anyway, I think it's quite prevalent, whatever the culture, by the way. And we need to better understand how to transform that into the empowerment dynamic. I don't, unfortunately, have time to talk about that, but that's part of, and the way we make that switch is in part by using dialogue. That's why the slide is here. Now, when we are finding ourselves in pain, especially due to a menace or a threat, especially if it's a threat to our own life, or existentially, by what somebody is saying, we feel threatened to our very core, then we know physiologically that the brain, somehow part of that, the complexity of the brain, and I'm no neurologist, please don't, it's very limited what I can say. But this is basically what happens, is that we retrieve into the reptilian part of the brain, and then we normally react with either fight or flight. That one has been known for quite some time in psychology, to which we've added more recently the notion of freeze. Those are the 3. And much more recently, we're adding the face. But in all honesty, the face part is not part of our brain physiology yet. It's acquired knowledge. And so the first 3 are automatic. It's like it happens instinctively. And I could give examples if need be, but there we go. But my preeminent way of reacting is to freeze. Sometimes, well, actually, once it saved my life. At other times, it was a stupid way to react, and it could have been much worse than it ended up being. So, but that was the instinctual part in which my brain is wired. But some of you more instinctively react with fight, and others with flight, and so on and so forth. So we're wired differently. But what's important is, once we better understand which of those 3 is dominant, is to try to eventually all of us, to develop and acquire more of the face, the source of the menace, of the threat. And there, it's to move from the I and the mistrust, again, towards eventually, slowly but surely, towards the we over there. And there are lovely stories that our religious and cultural heritage sometimes have about how some of the most successful peacemakers in the world, today and in the past, have actually been able to connect with their enemies in ways that included as a we, the enemy. And that's part of the learning lessons of our own respective histories that we can all share with each other, so that eventually, through dialogue, we begin to spend more time towards the right of this than on the left, knowing and recognizing that it's okay to be on the left and to start there. We need to be honest with ourselves. You know, I'm not talking about erasing the traumas or the pains. I'm talking about eventually first taking responsibility for recognizing it for what they are, and then slowly work towards transforming it, often with the help of others, through dialogue in part. Then, these are well-known sort of 5 ways of that conflict management can take place. Of course, the top right is the one that we're aiming at through dialogue. So that it's not a compromise, it's not obviously competition, or even worse, avoiding or accommodating, but dialogue is really a way to listen, to learn about our stories, our perspectives, in order to try eventually to honestly agree to disagree, so that we can learn from there how to better cooperate. So, part of the dialogue space is necessary to be safe. But safe in the sense that it's a comfort zone. We're on couches, we're on the beach and everything is nice and easy. Ain't too much learning taking place in the comfort zone, to be honest. But nor is there much learning taking place in the panic zone. In fact, the brain shuts down. We cannot learn in the panic zone. That's the importance for our classrooms, for any one of our spaces within the university and society at large, to be safe. But it's the stretch zone space where the learning takes place, which is the best time and ways where it takes place. And that means recognizing that the stretch zone means I'm uncomfortable, I'm not sure, I may have doubts, I don't understand, there's something not quite right, but I'm sticking with it. And I take responsibility to then maybe possibly ask questions, to clarify things, in order for my uncomfortability or the source of it to be better understood by me and the others, so that eventually it can be overcome. So that's part of the challenge, and dialogue, when well practiced, is precisely the way in which we do that. In a way, there are 10 principles of dialogue. I'm not going to read through them now, but when you see those 10 different principles, they really help sort of shape and carefully monitor the limits and how you go about talking with each other. And they're not, I had this problem at 2:20 this afternoon. I thought we had solved it, but okay. Plan B. Okay, so if you can simply click slowly through the rest of the guidelines 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the guidelines, we could, you can read them and say, oh, okay, great, good. Others have come up with it, and we'll use the wisdom of others in order to then sort of talk to each other on the basis of respecting those guidelines, right? The best, in fact, is when you meet new people, like in our Solidarity Dialogue groups, when we meet each other for the first time, the best is if you come up with your own guidelines, because you own them so much more than when you borrow them from somebody else, even though they may be great. And later on, you might just compare notes between what you came up with and what others have come up with, of which this, which was on the screen, is now there, is all about. Okay. Can I have the rest of the slides, please? Yeah? Okay. Now we're going to do a tango. Right? Good. So there are really important challenges to dialogue. It's not easy. There are physical and physiological challenges. For example, there's listening and compassion. Can you still hear me actually this way? Because I have, whoop, 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 whoop. There we go. Okay, there are physical and physiological challenges that we have to take into consideration. The safe and inclusive space, that's kind of pretty obvious, I think, for everybody, right? What we mean by that. Safe in both the physical and psychological and all the other ways that we can think of. Inclusive EDI is still important, I hope so, in Canada, and will remain so in Canada. Cross our fingers. But it's all about also listening actively and compassionately, which at one basic level is physical. But it's connecting, of course, with the heart in particular. Intellectually, of course, we talk about the challenges of curiosity versus need-based, meaning some people come to a dialogue space because they're curious to learn about somebody else, or they come because they really are seeking something, a recognition by the others, or convince somebody else, and so on and so forth. But eventually, the challenge is there are many people who are not curious to learn about others. And therefore, how do we get them on board? And that's where the need-based approach might be actually more suited often to go out and get people on the basis, what do you think you need? And who do you think you need to talk to in order to address those needs approach eventually. Then there's balancing similarities and differences. And I mean by that multiple identities. I didn't show you the slide of 100 or so identities that we can talk about. It's very complex. But then, thank you. Finding where we agree to disagree, given that multiplicity of perspectives that we may have on any topic as a group of people. Thank you. Next. Discovering and pursuing complexities should be at the heart of the dialogue agenda, not solving, as was mentioned earlier. Now, you hope that maybe later on you'll collaborate towards contributing towards solutions, yes. But at the start, it's more just developing the trust between each other in order, hopefully, to do more together later. And so, but then what? How do we cooperate from there? Next. Emotionally, we need to argue that, yes, next. We need to balance the joyful and the painful. It's not only about pain, there's also joys we need to learn to share and therefore contribute to hope. Next. Learning is best when in the stretch zone. I mentioned that already. Next. I'm almost done. And that you've seen already. Next. And on the spiritual level, if the screen will allow us to see it. Next. Keeping the connections going. Going for ever expanding cooperation. That's what I mean by spirituality through dialogue. Whatever your worldview may be, religious or not, hopefully each one of us has some spiritual dimensions. And the next one, developing a sustainable, thank you, developing a sustainable search for hopeful meaning. A sustainable search for hopeful meaning. This is what Concordia is doing with the series that you're developing, hopefully. Next, and now I'm going to go really quickly, but the challenges are about this very challenging intersectionality dynamics in our world today. But if we only keep it at the intellectual level of deconstructing everything, that's not enough. That may cause, in fact, a lot of friction. We know too well what the backlash has been and is ongoing. Next, a nicer slide about it. Next. Now, what happens when you combine intersectionality with neurodiversity and multiple identities? Now you get to this complex stuff, which I will let you explore if you want when you hopefully receive the PowerPoint. But that's difficult and challenging. But at the same time, it's incredibly, that's why I like to talk and use dialogue as a means to discover this about the people that I'm meeting in those different spaces. And through that, I begin to discover that I have much more in common, often, even with those with whom, on some levels, I profoundly disagree. It helps keeping the humanizing, despite the real deep differences. And we're almost done. Next. So, all of this complexity of dialogue you can apply at different levels, whether it's local here at the university or some of you are involved at other levels. Next slide. And of course, you can be involved in specific kinds of organization and different spaces that overlap. What's important is your engagement. And being here today, I think it's part of a reflection of that engagement. Next, and I think it's the almost last, yeah, it is the last one. But at the end of the day, each one of us is here. We have interpersonal dynamic that are always embedded inter-organizational. We're in a university room at the moment. And that has a mission and a vision. And therefore, the university itself has a worldview. And we each contribute our own specific worldviews to it. But that also means we're producing things, and therefore we're in connection with the environment, the local land that sustains us, and so on all the species. And then, of course, the last one is intertranscendental things, which if you're an atheist, that part drops out. Or, more specifically, you think that this intertranscendent stuff is part of the worldview of a religious person, not a reality. But for some religious people, it is a reality. And so that's what we walk around in our lives every day, every minute of our lives, we walk with all this. So welcome to the complexity of our world and to the opportunities which dialogue provides for us to discover more about this. And on that note, thank you, merci, shukran, sada.
Get the mic. Great. Thank you so much, Patrice. That was great. So our next speaker is Dr. Amal Elsana Alh'jooj, an indigenous Bedouin Palestinian academic and activist born in Israel. She is currently the founding executive director of the nonprofit organization Pledge, which stands for Promoting Leadership, Empowerment, Development, and Justice. She is the author of Hope is a Woman's Name, a personal memoir that recounts her experiences of growing up and her activism through the lens of intersectionality, navigating between individual social and political identities, and the systems of power within which they exist. Over the past 3 decades, Dr. Elsana has led a movement for feminist, indigenous, solutions-oriented community organizing and policy change advocacy in the Middle East and Canada. She has worked with marginalized minorities locally and internationally to organize against and challenge exclusionary policies and to implement sustainable solutions for social change. This rich practical experience feeds into her research interests, which lie at the intersection of international social work, community organizing, community building, justice, and peace building. Thank you. Amal.
Okay. Do you hear me? Perfect. I just want to start with saying that my son is here, Muad. So I'm so proud and happy and nervous a little bit, right? So Muad is at Concordia, and also Adan, my daughter, is at Concordia. So I have 2 here, which is a huge responsibility of the Concordia University, right? I know how it feels to have kids who are socially aware and very active. So I will try to put these amazing ideas that put here on this screen by my colleague and friend, Patrice, that maybe some of you felt like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be very hard. We have to deal with all of this to be able to start the dialogue? No, not really. Not really. So I'm gonna make it much easier, and I'm gonna put it in a place where all of us need to put our hands here. As a feminist, as a woman, this is the place that what we are seeing today in the world and the collapse of our institutions and our leaders chanting for dictatorship and racism, and it's normal to hear a president saying things about the Black community, about queer, about gender, and we say, oh, it's part of, no, we can't normalize these things. We have to stand up. So I'm coming to dialogue, not from the place of academia, with all due respect, which is amazing and important, but I'm coming to dialogue from a place of activism and community organizing and how we build communities and bring them together in a shared mission with a shared vision to think together, what is it for us, locally and globally? How to link the local issues of that single mother in Courtenay with the big machine of capitalism. How to understand this link as communities, as marginalized communities. That's also what I teach. So many people would look at me and say, why would people come and be in a dialogue space when the pain is so deep and great, when the suffering is unbearable, when people are hurt, and we know when we are hurt, we can't listen. And as someone who lost more than 53 people during the last year and 8 months, I was confronted by this question. Should I let myself sink into my pain or pull myself out of it? Because pain can pollute our hearts. When you are in deep pain, you can't see with clarity. You can't see even yourself. You can't understand your emotions. You can't understand the others' emotions. So how do we pull ourselves from that deep pain? And it's not post-conflict what we are doing. It's not post the situations. We are living in it every single day. So how do you do this exercise every day in the morning, checking your WhatsApp to see if your family is still safe, still alive, and yet to go see your students at the School of Social Work and be there for them, for every single one of them, and to be committed that whatever they are bringing to that space in the classroom, you are there for them. Not just by saying, thank you for sharing. That drives me crazy. It's to put your curriculum and syllabus aside. Put it aside and say, that's important. What my student is bringing is important. It's the here and now issue. The curriculum with all this fancy concept that we want to teach our students has nothing to do if our students are not able to listen and to be listened to and respected. And people would tell me, oh, it's really very difficult. Are you going to open for a space to talk about Palestine and Gaza and Israel? And you should avoid it. No. Trust our students. Trust them. They are very strong. It's us, the systems. And now you see that most of the systems and the institutions are falling apart when one individual is capable of taking the plane and going to Saudi Arabia and inviting Putin. One individual, it wasn't institutions. We grow up learning about institutions, the power of institutions. We have to empower our institutions because these are the foundations of democracy. Where are these institutions today? Where are these institutions? If it's Elon Musk and Trump and Putin are dictating our life today. So we want to be a unique institution in a way that we counter this situation. We want to be unique institutions because imagine the power we have. How many students are at Concordia? 35,000. Thank you, my son.
That's just the undergrads.
Yeah, that's power. We have the young generation that they are going to lead us in the future. And we are not really investing in them in a way that they can be agents for social change? Because of what? Because our institutions, and I'm so happy you are here, our institutions are becoming very much a servant for this capitalist system. So we want our student to go like this. That's it, not like this. So when we want to open their horizons, the space is very important. Their ability to talk and bring their pain is very important. And when the institution projects the fear on the students, that's when my student would come would say, I'm really afraid. I don't want to talk about this. I don't feel safe. Take me through this. What does that mean? Help me understand what does that mean. I don't care if half of the time of the class is gone by doing this. That's the important work. That's the important work. When our students understand why I'm not feeling safe, is it because that's what you told outside, that you're supposed not to feel safe? I'm chased after. Okay, take me through this. How it feels. Because dialogue, for many, many years, was marked by whom? By the oppressors, by the one who has power, right? So let's have dialogue. Okay? You don't have food, but let's have dialogue. You don't have peace and justice, but let's have dialogue. In what world we will dialogue if people are not living in dignity? In what world we will talk about peace if there is no justice? If the jargon of peace is the one that was dictated by the people in power, when you talk with the marginalized and the oppressed, and they don't want to talk about peace, not because they are bad people, not because they are violent, because they are talking about liberation. And if we don't understand this language, then we have an issue. How to transform this idea of what does liberation means to you? What does peace means to you? We have to delve into these questions. So when back in the Middle East, and especially more so working in building bridges between different communities, and especially communities that really deal with rooted conflicts, as Jewish Israelis and Palestinians, how do you do that? How do you create that space where people feel that they can come and feel that they are talking about liberation, that they are talking about justice, that they are talking about peace? And for our last Solidarity Dialogues, that was one of the challenges. And I'm so happy to see Rachel and Shelley here, some of the people who are participating in the Solidarity Dialogues. We started almost a year ago. So that's brave of everyone who participated. And of course, Patrice. So how do you really open that space? So I'm driven by a hero called Paulo Freire. That's my teacher. And that's not the only teacher, because as a woman, as a feminist, I can't say that a man is my teacher only. But I'm not excluding men. I'm not excluding men. My other teacher was my grandmother, Rogeya, who told me once, the free woman has nothing to fear. If the mind is changed by fear, it won't help you liberate yourself. And when I say liberate yourself, not by the physical meaning of liberation, liberate yourself from that anger, hate, rage. That's the place. You can't come into a place of dialogue with this energy. So it's really very important when we look at the Paulo Freire approach in dialogue. It's not the dialogue that was dictated by the people in power. Let's talk. And I was in many, many programs like this. Let's have Lebanon, hummus, and za'atar, and dance together, Jews and Palestinians. Oh, there is peace in the Middle East. And we see there is no peace and there is no justice in the Middle East. So all of our work in the last 20, 30 years went fifing, right? Went somewhere. And that because we weren't dealing with the issue in a way that it brings our identities. And identities in conflict and crisis times are becoming jail cells. This is me, and I'm not seeing anyone else. So when I'm talking justice, it's only for me and for my people. As a woman, justice only for women. If I'm a Black, justice only for Black. If I'm a Palestinian, justice. So if our values are not able to, really are very limited by this identity. So what does identity mean? What does identity mean? And what about our intersectional identities? So the minute an identity is very important, I'm not talking about identity as something negative. No one will be able to reach out to the other if I am not living peacefully within my skin, knowing who am I, my history, and my roots. But that place of self-confidence should allow me and push me towards opening my hands and reaching out. But if my identity is threatened, I will never be able to reach out. I'm always trying to protect that identity. And we have many examples in the world, many examples of the marginalized communities that we say, oh, they don't want to cooperate. Oh, they don't know what the partnership means. When their identities are threatened, there is no way that I can reach out to. So it's really very important that when we talk about dialogue, that's the space where we bring the identity in. Many dialogue projects were asking you to leave part of you outside. Leave that part. We really do want to talk about this. And maybe this part of your identity might trigger some issues in that dialogue space. Well, we say dialogue is happening in the discomfort zone. So if we agree on that, that's exactly what we need to do. We need to bring these identities. Every aspect of our identity is invited. Because guess what? If I am not fully myself in that dialogue space, when I leave, I'm not that same person inside the room. Because part of me is still outside. So why are we afraid to bring the identity piece into the dialogue space? When Paulo Freire was talking about this, he was talking about the idea of and that's what I did with many people that many Palestinians were telling me, oh, and we spoke about this, Mark, right? There is a genocide happening in Gaza, and you are talking about dialogue? People are in deep pain, and you are talking about dialogue? These questions are legitimate. These questions ought to be part of our discussion in the classroom. But guess what? When Paulo Freire was talking about dialogue, he wasn't ignorant. He knew the power dynamics. He knew what does it mean to be oppressed. He knew what does it mean to have this situation of people holding power over and people are lacking power. So in a dialogue space, we absolutely coming from different realities. That's for sure. But when we come together, the facilitators are creating this equal space where we are equally able to express ourselves. So we have the equal space to voice and talk and discuss and feel and bring our pain without fear of not being heard, without fear of not being safe. This is the space. Yeah, we leave back to our different realities, but at least in that space, the marginalized and the oppressed have their opportunity to bring their voice clear, to bring their ideas clear, and for the rest of the group to listen to that. And at the same time, Paulo Freire is talking about the oppressed and the oppressors as victims. As victims. This is where both of them start to understand, both sides start to understand that place of being oppressed and oppressor. So when we talk about dialogue, we talk about this set of skills that create that space of people to share in equal food, not avoiding the power relations, pointing to it, not hiding parts of our identities, but point to it. Because if we are not doing dialogue in that way, we will end up dancing together, eating Lebanon, hummus and za'atar together, thinking that we created peace, and the second day, we are not talking with each other. And I'm talking from experience. That groups of people that they were sitting together and felt that, oh, we're in peace, we're in love. The second day, after the first crisis, people weren't there for each other. So academia is the place to teach all these concepts that you heard from my friend. It's a full course if it's not a built-in in every single course that you are teaching. In every single course that you are teaching. Why we are focusing so much in debate? Because part of what we are doing without understanding, without that self-awareness, we are reinforcing capitalism and its systems. Debates is the best tool when you are living in this capitalist world. Because the marginalized didn't go to these debating clubs. So absolutely you're gonna defeat them. Because you have access to knowledge, you are prepared, and I'm here to convince you. In dialogue, it's not that. In dialogue, it's the place where you are entering with the idea and with the understanding that I am here to understand. And it's not by accident that when you go to the roots of the word dialogue in Arabic, means حوار. And the roots of حوار is hara. And the meaning of hara and hira is confusion. And حوار means seeking understanding. So you are coming to the حوار because you are aware. I really don't understand, and I'm here to better understand. So you are coming to listen actively. You are there to listen to something that might hurt you sometime. But you are also ready, this is a discomfort zone. So you are ready both to open your ears and to be there to listen, and you are ready to live in this discomfort zone, knowing that this is the only place that you grow up. All my life, I lived in this discomfort zone. And when you bring me to a comfort zone, I feel so bored. I run back to my discomfort zone. So it's the place where we grow, and our children and our students are growing. So when I talk about this as something that we have been doing, this is for the last year what we are practicing with students of social work at McGill University. Across all the required courses, we did with every single group of 15 to 18 students a solidarity dialogue workshop. And I will be very happy to share the impact report and the amazing feedback we received from the students, and even from professors who are telling us, oh my gosh, all these years I was teaching my students to debate. When you are telling us building communities not by debating, building communities is by dialoguing. And our institutions are not capable, maybe, of doing that. And that's sad. That's very sad, because our students are amazing. There was no, and I'm talking about 18 workshops, and Shelley and Rachel heard some of this. 18 workshops, there was no single situation where a student left without being addressed. It was one student that left, and I left with that student and left my co-facilitator, Brian Bronfman, to stay with the students. Because in solidarity dialogues, you need, in dialogue in general, you need 2 facilitators, not 1. Because you have to pay attention to the content and to the process. And you have to be there, because every content will create a different dynamic in the group. So if the facilitator is only focusing on the content, you are losing the students. So it was one incident, and I left with that student. And after 20 minutes, that student told me, I want to go back to that place. I want to go back to this space. And the facilitators were there only to hold that space for the students. And most of them selected the topic that everyone here is running away from. Everyone here is running, and yet they discussed it. They spoke about the genocide, they spoke about the Holocaust, they spoke about what's happening in Gaza, they spoke about the hostages, everything that you say, oh, I hope none of my students will raise. They will raise it. This is an academic institution. We taught them critical thinking. We need to be there for them when they are criticizing what's happening. But we need to create that space. So we are holding the space for them, that they are not hurting each other, that they are listening to each other. In one group, the Palestinian and the Jewish students shared and cried for 2 hours. And by the end of that session, I looked, they were holding hands. They need you. Our students are in great pain. Don't run away from them. Don't prevent them from protesting. Bring them to speak with you. They are angry. They are very angry. And we want them to lead the world in the future. Let's invest now in dialogue. So when they are in these positions of power, they understand the meaning of dialogue and the useful and the effectiveness of dialogue. That they will listen to the marginalized, and they will listen to all the people and understand when a Jewish student is feeling the pain, you are there for them. And if the Palestinian student is feeling that pain, you are there for them as their professor. But when you avoid, you are leaving them with what? With what? With pain. And when the pain is great, the only way people can act when they are painful is this. And we are wondering why our students are doing this, because we're not listening. We're not thinking about dialogue as a way. Think of them as our kids. Think of them as our kids. And these are our kids. The students are our kids. I can't look at any student without the feeling of he is my, or she, or they are my kids. If we have that commitment, if we understand the pain that they are going through, we will be there for them. And today it's Israel-Palestine. I promise you. Hallelujah, we are going to face huge conflicts in the future. You tell your students, no, we can't talk about this. We can't talk about our southern borders and what's happening there, that equity, inclusion, diversity are not the words that can be used anymore. Are we willing to do that? In every single period of history, students were the one who showed us the road. But let's teach them how, and be there to teach them how to protest so it's not violent, so it's not aggressive. Let's teach them instead of pushing them out. Because when we push them out, the only way is to push back. Simple logic. Very simple. So students are violent. No, we push them to that corner. It's very important to listen. It's very important to take our lead, to really think that what we are doing in universities, we are preparing the next generation that's going to deal with this tragedies that we are facing. So if this is in our mind, if this is our vision, then what we have to do these days with all of our students is to teach them how to be able to protest in a way that we respect and we take care of our colleagues and we are not violent. And there is ways to do that, but not to push them away. And diversity is beautiful. Diversity is something that we should embrace. It's not the source of the tension. No. The way we apply diversity is the source of tension. Because diversity can't happen without the feeling of belonging. We are diverse, but there is a space that we all share, that there is a space that we all belong to. So if diversity is happening just to count how many red scarves we have, how many black students, how many this, how many that, and once we are coming into the institutions, no one looks at our unique qualities and bring our qualities into this institution to reshape that institution by our diverse voices. It's the same institution with diverse people. We want to see a diverse idea of how institution can be diverse in their qualities, approaches. That's diversity. When everyone feels that this Concordia is my Concordia. This space is my space. Whether I am a Palestinian or a Jewish student or a black student or a queer student or an indigenous student, we all belong to this space. It's up to us how we create this belonging, because they need us. They need us, and we want them to be agents for social change, not knowledge consumers. Not knowledge consumers. These are the agents for social change. So it's our decision what kind of agents we want to produce from Concordia and McGill and our academia. Thank you so much.
Wow. What do you do for an encore? If one day I can communicate like you, Amal, it will be the achievement of my life. Thank you so much for that. There are no words. But David's going to endeavor to provide a few. So really, wow. I'm going to introduce David. So David is a professor of philosophy at Concordia. His research is anchored in phenomenology, a philosophical tradition that takes up key philosophical questions through dedication to our beginnings in human experience. Phenomenology has led him to studies of the body, habit, learning, spatial perception, meaning, gesture, touch, expression, emotion, art, language, animality, biological and human development, ontology, and above all, time and temporality. Teaching phenomenology and existentialism has deepened his understanding of all of the above, especially language, gesture, and communication. That experience of teaching and learning is what brings him to the table here today and is what he can bring to this dialogue on dialogue. He is currently, in his own words, trying to write a book titled The Birth of Time and the Sense of Nature. The book is still not done. Over to you, David.
Is this on? Okay, thank you. Bienvenue. Salam alaikum. Shalom. Grüßen. Thanks, Mark. I knew this was going to be a learning experience, and that's what I'm here to try and help with. So I'm an amateur at the kind of effort of fostering dialogue in the sorts of spaces that Amal and Patrice are working in. But through the labor of teaching, I need to be working with this all the time. And in fact, I think I've learned a lot from my students. And in particular, what you were talking about, Amal, reminded me of two students in particular when I was teaching a phenomenology class just at the beginning of the events of October, who, you know, if you went by the identities that we might have fixed to them from the outside, they were on opposite sides nominally, but every class they came in together weeping in various different ways. And I could tell from the way they were sitting together, which had a language of its own that was beneath the level of spoken language, that they were on each other's side. And I don't even think sides is the right word here. They were there for each other. And, you know, in teaching this class, I was trying to help them with tools that I think are important conceptual tools for thinking about human being and life and experience. And they were listening and hearing things and writing very interesting things in their papers that I learned from, but mostly I don't think I could have gotten through that class myself without them being there. And they always sat in the same place, right up in the front, at the left. And sort of my image of that class in that time and what I learned from it is the feeling of them, and also talks with them in, office hours and just in the little breaks, to sort of like get a existential emotional support. So that's what I'm bringing to the table, sort of like an effort to learn. This phenomenology that I do is, I think what I like about it, what I find important about it, why there's that big long list of absurd things there, and it's like, you have to start with not thinking that you know your stuff. So you go to learn your stuff from the things. Back to the things themselves is the famous slogan from Edmund Husserl and so on. And that's also the case with speaking to one another, dialogue, and just absorbing things from outside of you so you can get a little bit disoriented and then learn to be reoriented in a new way. And I think that is itself a kind of dialogical process. So maybe that's why I'm here. Okay, now I've figured out why I'm here. Oh, that's good. And I've tried to just talk myself through the little thing of how am I ever going to follow being able to speak about anything about dialogue after listening to you and hearing where you're coming from and why you're oriented to dialogue. And then you also had some thoughtful words about how you're oriented to dialogue in quite a different way than Patrice. And in the middle of hearing that, sorry, philosophers sometimes want to get a little bit complicated. It's like we decided this is going to be a dialogue about dialogue. But what I realized from this is that to have a good dialogue about dialogue, that itself needs to be a dialogue. And it can't be a dialogue between the people who already know stuff and are already lined up on the same side. So that's sort of like a meta feature. And I'm going to say a few more things. I came prepared with stuff. I did slides because Patrice did slides. And then I thought, what's the point of coming to a dialogue about dialogue with slides prepared? So I tried to be unprepared. And I'm going to continue in that modality. And that's a little bit about, so I'm trying to pick up on themes. And in particular, so I'm going to lead into this stuff about time that I came prepared with via something that I learned and I misunderstood the other day. We were having a little conversation over Zoom about hivar, the word for dialogue in Arabic.
Hiwar.
Hivar.
Yes.
And it comes from
hara. Yes, which is confusion.
Yes. So one of the things that I've been preparing in advance, because I knew that Patrice was going to be, I think, both of you, putting on the table the very important distinction, which I think is absolutely crucial to all of this, absolutely crucial to education, absolutely crucial to being a human being, absolutely crucial to navigating through life, the difference between something like debate and dialogue, right? So debate, I was going to come with slides and so on, where like, journalist debates, and then the kind of debate that you have in parliament, or the kind of debate that you have formalized to win within the framework of the law, where all the rules are set up in advance, according to the past, according to dictates, according to laws that nobody in the room gets to decide. And of course, there are problems now with there even being those laws. But, okay, here's another confession. Philosophers are like people, they're conceptual detectives, like who like to figure things out in order to figure out how things fit together. And I like detective shows. Because in detective shows, there are these terrible problems, and there's somebody who's often very compassionate who comes along and solves everything. And French detective shows, they're very good. And I love the way the word a priori is used in French detective shows. In philosophy, it's a technical term that develops from the philosopher Immanuel Kant about stuff that's fixed in advance. Before experience can happen, a priori, some things have to happen. And in detective shows in French, and just in the French language in general, it's what's obvious, what we can take for granted. And debate is the realm of people walking in with their a prioris, okay? And dialogue, on the other hand, I was doing a lot of reading of Plato to prepare, et cetera, things philosophers do, going back to Laches and Phaedrus, great dialogues, but they end in aporia, puzzlement, confusion, right? So this this is the thing about the world. To be a human being is to be confused, right? To be talking with somebody else is to be confused. It's not to be able to come in with your a prioris and to be oriented in advance to the outcomes that you want. Because if you come in with the outcome that you want, you're not doing dialogue.
Exactly.
And that's the terror of dialogue. That's the anxiety of dialogue. That's how it's hard, because you have to come in giving up something. And that's where, so uncertainty, risk. Another thing that's crucial, that's the name of the series, is courage. And this dialogue by Plato, it's really about education and sort of against people who try to say we can come up with the weaponry and tools for getting through education and the education of our youth. Like the future, that's the youth. The dialogue, it's two old guys who haven't done much in their life and they're trying to figure out, you know, Socrates, well, it ends up with Socrates coming in and trying to answer their question, how do we educate the youth? And it's more or less, why do you want an answer to that question? In the sense of, do you think I can give you a formula? No, education requires courage.
Right.
The courage to risk, to go into this space and to encounter another, and maybe also find out that you're not quite who you thought you are.
Exactly.
But you can't find that out if you don't bring in your own identity and your starting place. And this requires a lot of confiding and trust. And confiding and confidence, thinking back to the roots, it's like having faith with somebody else.
Yeah.
And friendship, you know, I think your point is, like, there's this peculiarity that for dialogue to begin, you need to have the confidence that you can trust somebody who you don't yet know and trust yourself to enter into some space where you can end up being friends with them. And the temporality of that is a little bit like friendship, right? Like if you could be guaranteed in advance that this person is going to be your friend and is always going to say yes to you, we know what that ends up like, right?
Yeah.
We know the people who have the loyal friends who always, no, that's not what dialogue is about. It's this risky thing of opening yourself up to somebody else. And here I want to bring to the table something that I learned probably in 1987 from Graham Nicholson, who taught me existentialism and phenomenology, the kind of philosophy I do now. And he had this way of making things that are very complicated be simple. And like Heidegger, the ontological difference, et cetera, it's just this nice little formula that he had for explaining what's at the core of what some philosophers, existentialists, phenomenologists think about human beings, which is simply this, that each one of us is a to be. He writes this hyphenated, right? Like, I'm a university teacher, let's wait and see. You know, this is a to be. I could quit tomorrow, Graham, you know. Like, it's to be the case that I'm gonna be a prof. Yeah, okay, anyways, so, you know, each one of us is a to be. We need to hold on to something. We need to have an identity. We need to have a starting place. Family, religion, friends, they give us the security, but then each one of us also has to wrestle with ourselves about what we're to do. Each one of ourselves in dialogue needs to open up to say, what am I to be in this kind of conversation? And I was thinking of, so I'll say this slowly because it's going to sound nonsensical, just because it's hard to say in English. Maybe in other languages it would be better. It's like to be in dialogue is to be together, right? Like this is a special kind of to be, right? It's like a to being together, working something out that we don't yet have, especially because we might not have the trust. So it's this very risky thing. And that requires listening in the sense of waiting for something that you don't yet know how to hear, right? Debate is like I also, in the middle of all this, I started watching France 24. They had this excellent debate, and some of them are more excellent than others, right? But you know, like you got these guys with these radar systems, and a particular like, hey, I think such and such comes in toward these guys, and it's mostly guys. And it's like they're ready to shoot down with well-formulated words, ways of not hearing the other, silencing, right? And I think listening and debate, it often just shut up, just listen. Don't think you know what to say. And that also makes me think of this beautiful practice that Quakers have of, coming in to decide something by just sitting for an hour together quietly. And there's a model of something quite profound in there. And that's where I want to shift to wrapping up under, this is sort of like the theme of openness and open-ended temporality, right? Like dialogue isn't a recipe, dialogue isn't a solution, dialogue is a way, it's a procedure. Is it going to work? No. I mean, that's the terrible thing. That's why we're all confused, right? Each of us is a to be, we want to have the answer, we want to have the formula. Universities, professions, et cetera, they give us answers and formulas, and then it turns out that they don't work. And all of us know that, right? Like, we just sit there wrestling with ourselves in the night. And you are putting this in terms of capitalism and the structures and the institutions. And I think I'd want to take that and just inflect it in the sense of all these people who are offering the recipes and the prescriptions, right? For how to be.
Yes.
You got to be like this. And if you're not like this, you're not successful and you're not going to make money. And so much of the recipes and prescriptions are like strategies for shutting down, not taking in criticism or pretending to take in criticism.
Very smart.
And setting up these like bounce back radar systems and defense systems and not listening. And above all, silencing.
Yes.
And then, okay, so I didn't realize how long I was going on for. So let me shift to the other theme that I had, which is coming back to Patrice's point. In the middle of it, you're talking about those people who figured out how to make peace. And there's a creation, a co-creation. Imagination, I think, is an immense tool.
It's a good one.
right?
Yeah.
And so far, the people who are best at imagination are the ones who are doing the unimaginable, which is terrorizing. This is unimaginable, and then tomorrow it's imagined and happened. We people who want to co-create and live with one another, we have to do the imagining thing.
Yeah.
And we have immense resources. What are those? Those are languages. Those are cultural practices. And I just wanted to bring to the table, there's a book you should read if you haven't read it. It's called Sand Talk. It's by Tyson Yunkaporta. He is from the place that's called Australia. In our language, he's a member of the Appalachian clan. He speaks a language that his people call, and I won't pronounce it correctly, Wik Mungkan. And in that language, there's a first-person dual pronoun, which he translates in his book as us two, right? So like the pronoun us, me versus you, I versus they, etc. In this language, there's a pronoun that's learnt, developed, grown in order to be together in a way that I think facilitates dialogue. His book is a lot about dialogue. And another thing, in Australian English, there's a word for speaking and talking to one another, which is yarning, right? Yarning. Weaving together, telling a yarn, telling a tale, having it go back and forth between us. And then I can't remember exactly where from within Indigenous cultures in this area. There's a book called The Language of the Birds collected by David M. Guss. It's stories of interspecies communication. And there's lots of stuff about like animals and humans being interchanging and so on. But one of the stories is about stories as being important stuff for human beings. And the stories are owls. The owls fly around and the stories weave through human culture. And just these languages and ways of thinking about how we talk, right? So philosophers think a lot about the concepts that we use, and we can offer you tools. Take an existentialism class if you like. But the other resource we have are all these things that have also gotten buried under all the stuff that Amal brought to our attention. It's like all that stuff, it's just got to be like obfuscated, obliterated under the technical language that's needed for a priori winning trade wars or whatever. It's that, and that's where universities are good. So it's like we need to put you together with Patrice and with us, but then also with the students, because they're the future. Like they're the point of all of this, and they're taking the stuff that we got, and they're making it into the stuff that, good stuff.
Yeah.
So And this I think is like, oh, when we collide in ways that hadn't been foreseen, stuff happens.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. I think you did a very good job of doing the encore. Three such compelling, charismatic, and deeply inspirational talks from three dialogue leaders. Thank you so much. Another round of applause, I think. We don't have as much time for Q&A as I would have liked. We had a little bit of a late start, and quite frankly, I just couldn't stop these people. I couldn't do it. I was too enraptured. So, and I think we're so privileged to have had the three of them up here today. We have 20 to 30 minutes, so let's get going with some questions.
For those of you in the space, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll bring this microphone over to you just so that the folks on Zoom can hear you. And for those of you on Zoom, if you have a question, please type it into the chat and we will be sure to read it out. Does anyone in the space have a question? Great.
Hi, so thank you so much to all of you for all your very impactful and powerful words. I wanted to ask you guys, do you think that, like, while it's very nice to hear you guys talk about dialogue, do you think that it's possible for the impact to go beyond individual conversations? And what does that look like?
Well, I could just begin by giving the example of the Geneva Initiative, or sometimes also called the Geneva Accord. Developed based in Geneva, of course, but with a variety of different Israelis and Palestinians, as well as several other sort of primarily diplomats, but also social society sort of organizers in the Middle East and in Israel, Palestine in particular. And that initiative, with its updates in 2009 and its many annexes and whatnot, is the result of dialogue. Over several years of consistent dialogue in order to try to say, yes, it is possible to solve this problem, this conflict. And now there's some people are trying to bring it back on the agenda of the world's awareness and not to waste all of the energy that went into getting to that point.
Yeah, thank you for this a very good question, because yes, if we are engaged in this dialogue and then that dialogue is not extending outside of that space to change people's life and empower the people around us, then what is it that we are doing? Dialogue is a foundation of our action. Dialogue is a space where we sit together, that this is the vision and this is the mission. This is the road that we take together. So in any dialogue project, there has to be an action item. It has to be something, because during the action itself, you test your understanding and then you go back to the dialogue circle. So it's parallel processes. So if you think of dialogue as something that's like 12 sessions and khalasna, that's not the process. The dialogue is part of a whole process where from the dialogue, you are in action. From action, you are gathering more dilemmas, challenges, and new knowledge that you create by the practice, and then you bring it vice versa. So that's a whole process that we call it really a holistic approach when we talk about dialogue. And I can give example, like we were able to create a joint school in Bir al-Saba for Jewish kids and Palestinian kids. I was the co-founder of that school. We taught in grade 1, we taught Nakba, we taught Holocaust, but in a different way. So the kids will understand that there are narratives here, that we can dismiss one narrative and empower another narrative, that these narratives are equally important, equally to be taught. And when kids are doing that, I look at ourselves, we corrupted the kids. We brought prejudice, because I remember one of the stories, it was Beit Mace I think, Muad, you remember that story, Beit Mace. And the story is telling half Hebrew, half Arabic. And that story is telling the journey of Noah coming and finding that Mace is living in her house and saying to Mace, this is our house from 5,000 years. And Mace would say, but this is my home. This is where I born. This is where my... And then we stop the story there and we ask the children, do you have any suggestion? Noah and Mace, they are friends. They want to live together, but we want you to help them. The ways and the creativity, I felt ashamed of ourselves as adults when the kids were there to help us really see these things. And dialogue is not working in vacuum. We're not, if it's for us as people, we'd have solved many issues. But we are working against storms of politics of fear and politics of identity. Look at the leaders dividing us instead of looking at the system and trying to channel our energy to change that system. They are creating these divisions. So instead of seeing Patrice as my colleague and let's do it together, I look at Patrice and I want to fight against Patrice. And that's what the system wants to do when they, in their messages, in their projects, they are talking about and they are applying politics of fear. So if it's for us as dialogue projects, we would have succeeded. But what's happening in the world that we are working and people, I was in a conference, a women conference that the title was, the wind is taking us to the right, let's sail to the left. And I said, it's not wind. I hope it's a wind. It's a storm. It's a storm, and the storm is this. So you are super confused. The wind, you know where the wind comes from. And you can really make sure that this is the direction. But when it's like this, so it's a storm, the way we are living it. So dialogue is very effective, very important, but being aware of that storm and navigate through that storm, then it will be the impact of the dialogue-based action.
Yeah, hi. So thank you guys so much for everything that you had to say today. I guess my question kind of starts with a little bit of concern about a previous comment, specifically about the Geneva Conventions. And I think, like, as a Palestinian myself, but also someone who holds Israeli citizenship, I think it's important to recognize the fact that the Geneva Conventions to many Palestinians and oppressed people represent a lack of ability to enforce protective measures and to actually allow for dialogue that will save lives. Beyond that, I think that realistically, there is very little regard for the policy and systemic obstacles that prevent oppressed people from coming to the table to have dialogue. Mm-hmm. I can say, like, as I said, as a Palestinian who holds Israeli citizenship, it's illegal for me to show support to the ICJ on my social media. Right? If I were to go back home and try to visit my family, I would face physical threats to my safety for trying to come forward with dialogue. And I think that extends to then how I engage with dialogue here at Concordia with my colleagues. And I don't see much regard for that when it comes from the administration. I think that there is kind of an assumption that students are expected to engage in dialogue in a certain way, but absolutely no regard for the safety consequences that come with that. Through my work as a representative of the student union, I have faced very real threats from the Israeli government. And so, while it's easy to tell students, oh, we applaud you for your bravery in speaking up, the university also holds a responsibility to protect those who are coming to these tables with an exponentially higher risk than others. So I guess my question to you, I've kind of two questions. My first question would be, how do you recommend that universities and institutions like Concordia create policies and measures to protect students who have a lot to contribute to these conversations? And then my second question would be, how would you then address the weaponization of security culture in the ways in which many students who are coming to these conversations are misrepresenting discomfort as a threat to their safety when others really are facing a threat to their safety by having these conversations? Thank you.
Very good question. You want to start with Geneva?
On the Geneva Initiative and Accord, I 100% agree with you. And the big question, of course, is why was it dropped? It's a shame in many ways that reflects precisely the kinds of ongoing sort of challenges ideologically, politically, and racially, because there are racist undertones as well but when I say racist, I mean not just racism at a cultural / sort of ethnic level, but also in terms of political ideology that overlaps with theological ideology. And certain forms of theologies are also involved in creating the other in a way that is so exclusive and demonizing that it ends up sort of supporting sort of the status quo of whatever injustice there is at the moment, and there has been for decades. And so, yes, there are ways in which we need to, yes, not just bring back, I think, the initiative, but rethink seriously how we talk about it and what kind of spaces do we create that are viable in terms of the protection that you're talking about for the real dangers of safety that you're referring to, which is true, but also that actually could possibly have eventually some impact in making inroads on changing mentalities, both here and in the Middle East, as to what's possible in terms of the future. Because otherwise we're going to stick to the status quo of injustice and of mutual, what I call often, this codependencies of exclusivisms and of what I mentioned earlier, of competing sort of trauma claims and so on and so forth that are rooted in a language and that wants to use that as a reason for claiming security and militarization, to continue without stopping, without any consideration for the impact on other sides, because I also want to put sides in the plural. And that is really important to address. And so thank you for bringing this up. We all need to create those safer spaces to talk about this, because we can't just look at the past, but we need to bring it up to today in a way that is safe, because if we say dialogue needs to, rule number one, be a safe space, well, what does it mean? And our safeties are different depending on where we come from. What is our legal statuses here, for example? And so now I want to sort of address sort of my colleagues at the Concordia University, because I think I want to hear them in terms of, to follow up on the rest of your question on how does a university create a safer space for students to engage in those dialogical spaces that are so necessary for the learning to take place, the transformation to happen, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you for this very smart and challenging question. I think it's absolutely, when I look at all these treaties and all these conventions, as a community organizer, that's my number one question. To what extent these treaties or agreements were rooted in communities? How many Palestinians and Israelis in their communities were part of that process and dialogue? It was that group of people talking about the solution and then thinking that this is the solution. The solutions are very much a solution that people can own them. And when you own something and you feel responsible to keep it, to protect it. But if the solution is imposed, the first thing when I am angry, I'm going to destroy it. And this is when I was working in South Africa. People was like, yeah, look, we created this very fancy playground in Limpopo, and they destroyed it. I said, who created? Like, start with your language. We created. So let's talk about we created. And who told you that they need the playground? Because it's in Manhattan. You brought it here. So it's the whole approach of how we work with communities. Are we working for them? Are we working with them? And the whole idea, and this is always dialogue between us, which is I value so much, needs-based approach or strength-based approach. Which one is the one that would empower people more? When you tell them that you don't have and we are here to give you, this is the approach, or we say, you have amazing stuff. We are together going to leverage them to create new solutions, but rooted in your own community. So this is when you feel that ownership. So if these treaties and agreements are rooted in communities, people will stand up and protect them. But if it's Seru Nisaiba and Ami Ayalon, Where is Sari Nusayba Name? I'm not criticizing you. No, I'm not. I am talking about in general that these are treaties that should be started from the communities and creating the solutions bottoms up.
If you look at the website of the initiative, you'll see that for over 15 years, once it was out, there were investments mostly from the government of Switzerland and of Norway, to be specific, that invested into teaching and getting the message out to communities to reach out, because they knew that ultimately it had to get the support of grassroots at the grassroots level. So there's been effort, but guess what happened in 2019? The funding stopped.
But that's a whole different story. But so that's the second part. What's your name? Are you still with us?
Yes.
Yeah. So the second part is really, I'm looking at Concordia. And I think and absolutely believe that that space for dialogue is essential. And we need to create it, and we need to make sure that our students who are engaged, that we are there for them. So we create this. We don't use in our solidarity dialogue, we don't use the concept ground rules, we use keys, because rules and conditions are the power of the oppressors, right? So we use keys. What are the keys that will help you feel heard and respected? And then when they create these keys, 12, 13, they stand in one line holding these keys, and then the next question, do you think that these keys are enough for you to engage in this very difficult conversation? Do you need more? And one incident with one student said, I think I need more. I said, okay, so go ahead. And she said, when I'm not feeling capable mentally and physically to continue the conversation, can I leave? I said, absolutely yes, you can leave, and I will join you. I will be out with you, and I will sit with you if you need me. If you don't need me, that's your choice, right? So what are the keys? So when we create these keys, and it's like 4 components of how do we do that, and I think Shelley and Rachel and Lisa White and people who participated in the Solidarity Dialogue are aware of this, but it's really how Concordia is going to create, once we are doing these workshops, how Concordia is gonna be there for the students. And the whole idea of safety, it's very personal. Something is safe for me might be not safe for others. So we need to go in depth and understand, what does that mean? So when I talk with the students, it's when you feel that you are incapable to continue the conversation, either mentally or physically, that's where you say, I can't, and then. But if you feel discomfort and you feel not, oh, I don't know if this is, that's the place that I will encourage you to stay. I will be there to say, another 2 minutes and then we will check. Another 2 minutes and then we will check. So it's really a whole process that we create in dialogue, and we are here. We are here and we are willing to bring this, and we have your amazing members of the Solidarity Dialogues who are part of our team, and we are here. We can really create a whole thing here that goes from the undergrad to the PhDs, and yeah, you use us and bring yourself, and we can really exchange and build something that it's really unique to Concordia and its strength and needs.
I think I might have something to add because it's on the table and I think you put your finger on it. And first of all, I think the point that dialogue has to come from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And ensuring these spaces and abilities to communicate has to come from the bottom up. And here, when Amal was talking about Paulo Freire, the person who I learned similar things from is Simone de Beauvoir.
Yeah.
So in each of her books, she's thinking about a kind of problem, like how can there be freedom in ethics? How can we rearrange the relations between sexes and genders? How can we think about aging properly? And in each of her books, if you're reading them well, it seems like the thing that she's trying to sort out, if we're really going to be able to sort it out, there has to be sort of a bottom-up revolution of how we live together overall. And in particular, in her book, The Ethics of Ambiguity, how can there be freedom in ethics? And that's basically, how can there be dialogue? And it seems like at the moment, there are going to be, and there are these structures that do impose themselves upon us from the outside and above. And, you know, I guess it's not solely within the capacity necessarily of a university or any one of us to bring that about. But then I think Amal's point, I completely agree. For that thing to happen, there has to be dialogue. So it's this paradox.
Yeah.
Dialogue is trying to be shut down. We need to change it so it's not. What do we need for that? The thing that's being shut down.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may partly disagree with one of the earlier point about sort of, you're saying, and I quote, sort of dialogue must come from the bottom up. I think it needs to come from both.
It's holistic.
Because leadership, good leadership, opens up spaces for dialogue also. And I think this example today here is one of them.
Very good point.
And so, but it has to be in dialogue with other places that are asking for the creation and the ongoing sort of financing and creating those space that are safe, that allows for these efforts to actually be sustainable in a community like Concordia.
Absolutely, very good point.
We did make a commitment to leave the space at 5 p.m. and it's
That's exactly.
Mark, let me get you a microphone so people can hear you.
I've never been accused of speaking quietly before. We have made the commitment to leave the space at 5 p.m., unfortunately. I feel like there's so much more to say. It's been such an engaging few hours with all of you in the audience. Thank you so much for coming. I'm thrilled with the turnout. What this shows me is that we are doing the right thing by having these conversations. We need to continue having them. And they need to be both exciting and energizing, but also difficult, right? They also need to be in that space of discomfort sometimes, dialogue in that space of discomfort. So thank you to our three leaders, dialogue leaders here, for helping us navigate that space. It really has been a transformative moment, at least for me. I hope I speak for some of you as well. I want to let you know that we have 2 more Courageous Conversations planned for next year, one in the fall, one in the winter. And I can give you a sneak peek of what's going to happen in the fall. We have a session entitled Knowledge Politics, Institutional Neutrality, Academic Freedom, and the Culture Wars. And it's going to be very exciting, I think, with Daniel Levy from McGill and Amy Reed from PEN America. And she has been on the front lines of facing off with Ron DeSantis. And dealing with the weaponization of critical race theory and the censorship around LGBTQ issues in the curriculum. So we have a lot to look forward to in terms of this series. I hope you will join us for those, and you will certainly get a lot of information about them in due course. So please, again, join me in thanking these wonderful speakers, and thank you for being here. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. And just from a note from us, just for those of us joining online via Zoom, we're going to be closing up the Zoom and live stream now, but this conversation remains available on our YouTube channel. You should revisit it and share it. You should also have a wonderful weekend. Thanks.